We're breathing spores. We're infected. You killed us both. Did I? Where is she?
Hey, kiddo.
Hi.
Welcome, everyone. We are back talking episode 5 of season 2 of The Last of Us, which was titled Feel Her Love, an episode that had a lot of feels, good and bad, as we'll talk about in this breakdown. If you're watching this video, this is a part of a clip out of our live after show that I do every Sunday. We do a watch party, then we do an after show. So if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to it on Spotify or Apple, let me know your thoughts in the comments. What did you think about the episode? The highs, the lows, the introduction of the spores, which were absent in season 1. But if you're familiar with the game, they're very, it's a pretty big part of the game that they decided not to go with in season 1. And we'll talk about that. But let me know what you thought about the spores. Dina, Jesse is now in the mix. Tommy's in the mix. The brutality that we can see in the sea from the scars. And what now? What do we do now with Ellie having this aggression and having this anger that we've been kind of, I don't want to say we, but at least me, have been waiting to see as she beats Nora with a pipe? A lot to discuss. So let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. But let's get into the discussion in tonight's episode and kind of get into the first scene here. And as we'll talk about here, man, as we open this episode, we have this, I don't want to say cold open because it applies to the story, but we have this conversation being had with the wolves in present time. And initially I thought this was a flashback, but the conversation being had is this character had her, doing their normal routine, checking out things, checking out different locations. And there was a blocked off portion of the hospital. I believe it was B2, B3. And they were just, I don't know why they're checking it now. I feel like they would have done this a while ago, but nonetheless, they're doing the check down, they're securing the building, and they come across her and her crew, and one of her sons was in the mix, and lo and behold, they come across the spores. Now, for those that played the video game like myself, or those that aren't too familiar with the video game, spores are, as they talked about in tonight's episode, are airborne. It's a way for the mutation, the fungi to spread. And if you can inhale it, you can be infected. Now, if my memory if my memory serves me correctly, the reason they didn't have, and it's a pretty big part of the video game, at least again for someone that played the first video game, hasn't played the second one, you got to be careful when you're around spores, right? You got to have your mask on and all the different stuff. Which, speaking of the mask, if I'm not mistaken, the reason they didn't have the spores being a big integral part of season 1 is the mask, right? You don't want to have, even though Pedro Pascal, he wears a mask in another show that he does in a galaxy far, far away, but you don't want to have all your characters in masks, right? There'll be like a bunch of people walking around talking like Bane. You can't understand them. You can't see them. You can't see the emotions in their eyes. So I understand why they decided to go that route. And they replace the spores with, you get bit, you get infected. Understandable. I wonder what the decision was of bringing it back to this season, because all those issues you had about not having in season 1 would still apply to season 2, unless they really condense where spores can be found. Like, we know that this is in a basement, so closed off areas, basement, underground areas. So maybe they're just, again, I'm assuming the way they're going to handle it is that it's not as spread out. So I'm very, very curious on how that is going to be handled. But it is exciting though, because it is, like I said, it is a very big part of the game, and it creates that atmosphere, that scary atmosphere, that fearfulness for the characters, besides Ellie, who's immune to it, obviously. So let me know in the comments if you are a game fan, if you're happy for the spores to be included in the story. If you're not familiar with the video game, if you're intrigued by this element that we'll talk a little bit more about later. Ellie and Dina. So the conversation is being had. Of course, we know that the mission is find Abby, but in the meantime, we know that Nora is in the hospital. We're gonna find Nora. By finding Nora, we're gonna find Abby. That's the game plan. So this is where a little bit of my issues coming in with these last two episodes and the kind of positioning of our characters. There's nothing wrong with Dina having a purpose. And I love the way Isabela Merced is playing Dina. She's very assertive. She's very about it. She's focused. She has a lot of attributes that can help in this mission. Obviously, the mapping, paying attention to her surroundings, and if I'm being honest, keeping Ellie on track. I really enjoy the Dina character. Again, this is just where I'm trying to remember the conversation when the game came out. I think a lot of people initially didn't like Dina when the game was out in 2022 or 2021. I don't know if people thought she was annoying or whatever the case may be, but I feel like if that is the case, let me know from video game characters out or players out there. But I feel like they've done like a revamping of Dina because she's very useful in this situation. She has a lot of purpose. She is literally, and this is where my issue comes in, she's leading the charge. Dina is the leader in this mission so far. Nothing wrong with that. My only issue with it, though, is that it kind of minimizes Ellie. It almost feels like Ellie in the Joel kind of, I don't want to say relationship, but it feels like a dynamic where Dina is leading the charge. Dina's looking at the map. Dina is the one getting everything in order and all that different stuff up until this point in the story. To me, it's making Ellie come off like she's just a part of the ride, which is very terrible considering that the reason they're in Seattle is because of Ellie and obviously her revenge for what happened to Joel. And again, I know Dina's there because, as we'll talk about later, she loves Abby. She loves Ellie. She obviously had a relationship with Joel, so there's a little bit of that for her as well. But it just doesn't feel, at least to me, as someone that hasn't played the game, but just someone that enjoys storytelling, enjoys these type of stories and these characters. It just feels like the mission at hand and Ellie's objective and Ellie's kind of arc is just stagnant. It doesn't feel like it has any oomph in the story. It doesn't have any purpose in the story. It just feels like they're on this trip without a purpose. Obviously, we know what the purpose is, but it's not being conveyed by Ellie. That's the frustrating part of this show so far, at least these last 2 episodes. It's been a very frustrating experience to watch. And I'm trying to, I always like to separate, even if I read a comic or read a book, if I'm familiar with a certain IP and you see it being adapted, you try to separate the two. You got to understand that they're taking elements. Obviously, the creator is involved in the show, but they're not going to do a one for one. They're going to take some creative liberties. They're going to do some different changes, and you can accept that or you can't accept it. But I've come to accept that. So putting my fandom of at least the first video game and some of my knowledge about the second video game, putting that aside and just looking at the story at hand, it's just not a well-written characterization of Ellie so far. It doesn't feel like Ellie has, she almost feels like she's a supporting character up until this point in the story. Right now, Dina's leading the charge. Dina's the one, and we'll talk about a scene a little bit later. She's the one that almost motivates and almost reminds Ellie why they're here, which is just so weird to me. I don't want to be on this soapbox, on this rant for so long, but I just want to express that is my frustration with these last 2 episodes is the lack of urgency from Ellie, the lack of, like, even if Ellie and Dina had some issues with each other about why they're there, like it's just felt like they're on this road trip, and it feels like this is a trip for them to fall in love, and it seems like that's the main priority, and everything else is coming behind that. And just a little side tangent before we continue this breakdown, I did a little deep dive last week. I rewatched last week's episode, and I watched some of the cutscenes from the video game up until this point in the story, and I am very aware of how they put Tommy's not where he's supposed to be. Like, Tommy was supposed to be in Seattle at this point. Tommy has laid out tons of people in the video game at this point in the story. The Dina revealing her pregnancy was handled differently. Ellie's kind of attitude towards her is much different. Like, she calls her a burden, which is very much the truth at this point. So I am very familiar with what the video game does at this point. But again, I want to take that out of the equation and just look at what we have in front of us. And it just feels like the show has switched the dynamic to make Dina more of the lead in charge and make her more of the lead of the show almost versus Ellie. And I just don't feel like that is the smart decision. It hasn't played out well for me. And I want to be very clear about this part. I think Bella Ramsey is a really great actress. We've seen them acting since they were 10, 11 years old in Game of Thrones. And they damn near stole every scene they were in. So we know that Bella is capable of great things, and we've seen it in this show. They were phenomenal in season 1. But there seems to be a disconnect from the writers in the direction for the Ellie character. And there almost seems like they forgot that Ellie's 19 and not 14. She's still very childish. Even the conversation early on the episode with her and Dina talking, and it's still kind of playful. And it just feels like they have forgotten the essence of the character. It just seems like they're lost in the sauce. They've lost the plot, and they're kind of losing me with Ellie. And I don't know. And this is just me again. This has become a long tangent. Get back to the breakdown. I'm just expressing my thoughts to you all. I don't know, because from what I understand and from what I remember from when people played game 2, people did not like Ellie, and not for the way she was written or whatnot, but it was the decisions she's making. It's like it's supposed to frustrate the audience. It's supposed to make you frustrated with Ellie because of the decisions she makes on a narrative decision. And I don't know if the audience or if the writers said to themselves, taking the outside negativity for the casting of Bella Ramsey, which if you're not online, if you don't know this, there has been especially this season, the last few weeks in particular, there has been a lot of negative commentary, a lot of negative comments towards Bella and, her being in the role or them being in the role, which is unfortunate because, again, I feel like Bella is just so great as an actor and it has shown that they are great. But I almost feel like the writers are protecting her or protecting the character Ellie and protecting Bella at the same time and not giving the character those attributes that could be frustrating. And I think they're doing that because they already know that Bella is getting so much pushback online. They don't want to put those character traits on her. If you kind of get what I'm saying, right? I mean, we'll talk about that in this episode. She does something that could be frustrating for people, even though I think she's in the right to to do what she does to Nora, because of what Nora did to her and Joel. But I just feel like the writers are in a conundrum. They have their hands tied. They're in a catch-22. It's like we can't put maybe the things we want for Ellie to be from the game into the show because Bella's getting so much shit from the audience and the negativity online, and we don't want to put that on the actor and we don't want to put that on the character. So let's maybe revamp the story. Let's lighten Ellie a bit. Let's put her in the background a little bit. Let's have Dina maybe be in the forefront. Again, I have no evidence for that, but that's what I'm getting the vibe. That's the vibes I'm getting from the way Ellie's been written so far, is that the show is protecting Bella, but also softening Ellie and not giving her the aggression, the anger, the frustration, because they don't want Bella to catch, the unwarranted negativity that they've been getting so far. So I don't know, maybe a telltale book after the show's in it that they'll say something like that. Anyway, that's how I feel, is that Ellie has been sidelined and been kind of reduced to a kid at this point in the story, and the decisions they've been making so far with the character has been kind of baffling and frustrating for someone like myself that loves the character, and I know how many other people like her, the character as well, and then see themselves in Ellie. And it is a beautifully written character. It's a phenomenal character, and it just feels like the show has kind of lost the plot with the character. But that's been my TED Talk. Let's get back to the episode. There seems to be a key element of the guitar and music. We've seen Ellie, playing the guitar, singing a song for 2 weeks in a row now, and I am to assume that this is very pivotal. This has to be. This has to have some meaning. If I were to guess based on episode 1, Joel, guitar in his hand, I'm assuming that this has some type of importance to her. I feel like the music is her way right now of remembering him in a good light, right? Not remembering their issues they had or however long they weren't talking, and a decision that Joel made to her to lie about what he did at the hospital. She's kind of suppressing that and just remembering the good things about Joel. And I would imagine the guitar, the singing is something that she can remember him by. As we see Ellie and Dina on the road on their way to Nora, they see more of the gang war, between the Bloods and the Crips, but no, the gang war, the war between the Scars and the Wolves. You know, it's an eye for an eye, it's blood for blood. You know, last week we saw the Wolves, that's all over the place, and now we see the reverse of that, of the Wolves now putting their dead ones under the sign, "Feel Her Love," which again is the title of this episode. It's brutal, man. It's a bloody war. It's tit for tat, and I am really intrigued to learn more about, again, this prophet and more of the Seraphites and their beliefs. And there was mention of kind of their, you know, Dina kind of exposition-y tells us as an audience that, you know, they got bow and arrows, they don't use walkie-talkies, they seem to be, you know, from like following the Mormons ideology of going back to the olden times in 1800s. So there's a little bit of that understanding, but I hope that there is a better understanding from someone from the Scars. Speaking of backstory, we have Dina telling us as an audience and also telling Ellie what happened to her and her parents. They were murdered in front of her. She killed the man that killed her parents. And this whole story became about because Ellie approaches Dina and says, we don't have to do, after she saw the dead bodies, you know, she assumed that this is just too tough, too much to take on right now, especially with the pregnancy, right? It's a big thing for Dina right now. It's just like you have more than one person to worry about. You have a baby to take care of. She brings that up, and this is where Dina says, well, I'm gonna remind you that I have seen some shit, right? I've seen my parents die in front of me, and I'm fueled by this journey because, you know, in a way, Joel was not her dad, but, you know, the way that he went out was very similar to how her parents went out. And if she was Ellie, if she didn't kill that man that killed her parents, she would have always been on the hunt and always looking.
I promise you, I would have hunted him down forever.
The point of the story, and it goes back to my frustration, is Ellie almost wants, I don't want to say she wanted to abandon the mission, but she's like, you know, you can go back, you can head back, and you know, you don't have to go on any further for obvious reasons. But then it was almost like Dina was like, no, I'm here to get my revenge, but I'm also here to support you. But let's go with the right. Let's keep this mission ahead. And it's just like, to me, that was almost like a reminder for Ellie to why they're here. And it just feels like, again, I don't feel like Ellie needs that motivation. You know, I almost feel like, and obviously you can't revise where we're at in the story, but I go back to episode 3 when they're at that, you know, town meeting and voting on if they should go to get their revenge on Joel. And obviously we know the results of that, but I almost feel like even from that point, Ellie should have been on some like, what's wrong with you guys? This is how you treat the people you lost? You're just going to hide and not get revenge? Like, I feel like at that point, Ellie should have been on her bully mindset. She should have been upset. She should have been angry. She should have been mad. But again, it just seems like it's just not a priority. It's not a top of mind. Again, this scene when Dina's essentially motivating her, she says to her, Dina, which again, I feel like the role should be reversed, but Dina's the one that looks at Ellie and says, we can stay, we can go. It's whatever you want to do. And it's on Ellie to say, and almost like with hesitation, let's keep going. But there's, like I said, there's a level of hesitation. There's a level of, should we go? And the reason I'm pointing this out is it doesn't match what we saw Ellie do later when she sees the hospital and goes off of Nora. Because to me, it should have been the reverse. That, not that obviously Ellie's not going to tell her, you know, the story's not going to add up, but from the sense of like, Ellie is trying to convince Dina not to necessarily stay and go on this mission with her, but she's trying to convince Dina why she is so gung-ho and so passionate about why she needs to kill Abby, because of how important Joel was to her, right? That should have been the conversation. And maybe later on we learn about Dina's tragic backstory. But again, it just felt like when she told her that, Ellie was like, let's go. And should we go? Like, no, like, I don't know, man. Because again, it's just this Ellie to what we see later are two different Ellies. And it's that journey of how we got to the aggression, the anger, which I'm happy to see. I don't condone violence, but as far as the story goes, I'm happy to see that that's where the character's at, because it makes sense why they're on this mission, while they're in Seattle. There's a disconnect. There's a very disconnect. At this point in the episode, Dina and Ellie find their way into the soft spot of the wolves. As we have in the scene, they notice one of the infected. There's not just one, there's not just two, there's like 15 of them. And at this point, they realize they're outnumbered. And these aren't just the regular infected. These aren't just clickers. These are the stalkers. We met a stalker in episode 1. Very, I don't want to say very intelligent, but they have more of an intellect and more of a savviness about them, more so than the clickers. It's very scary. That is a scary scenario to be in. And they're not prepared. They are not prepared at this point. And I will say narratively, because I think I've been pretty negative so far on this episode. Positively speaking, narratively speaking, this is where the power dynamic changes. And this is where we're reminded that Ellie is the lead of the show. Up until this point, it's been Dina. But at this point, this is where Ellie takes charge and says, there is a cage over there I need you to get to protect yourself. I'm going to lure them. I can get bitten as many times and not be affected because I'm immune. I'm going to save you now. I'm going to take charge now. Up until this point, Dina has been the one that's been doing the radio, has been doing the map, has been keeping the mission ahead. She's been keeping the mission afloat. And Ellie's just been tagging along. But now Ellie has taken charge. So I do like this narrative shift. I think we're at this point in the episode, we are almost 30 minutes into the episode. And even dating back to last week's episode, this is the first time we have seen Ellie take charge since they've been in Seattle. And I like that because Ellie is the lead. This is her story at this point, right? This is the new chapter. This is the new version of the story of the show.
You see that fencing over there? I'm going to lure as many as I can. You're going to run in there, secure the gate, secure however you can, and stay in there. Dina, I can get bit a lot. You can't. Do as I say.
So I do like that Ellie did take that charge. She was willing to do what she can and protect the love of her life. And I should bring that up too. They acknowledge, well, I think it was before that, the scene before that. She talks about who's going to go in first, and they talk about not to use their weapons because it can obviously attract not only more clickers, but also the wolves can hear them outside. So use your knives versus your weapon. And Ellie's like, oh, you don't want me to use my gun? You think I'm gun ho? I shoot first, ask question later. And she's like, yeah, that's what I love about you. And they admit their love to each other. It's like a little, don't need this lovey-dovey stuff right now. But they do say they're, at least to the show's knowledge, they say they love each other for the first time. And Dina's like, you don't have to say it, I already know. So a little sweet moment for those two. But again, in the moment, Ellie takes charge. She has Dina run into the cage. And honestly, all hell's breaking loose. Like, again, Ellie's trying to do her as much as she can to distract them, the stalkers, and she takes out some of them. Dina takes out some of them, but her ammo's running low. They're saved. And, not to dismiss the character development of Ellie and Dina, but like I've been expressing, I haven't been the biggest fan of it so far. But now we get something added into the mix and can really shake some things up of the dynamic, which I think was kind of neat at this point. And that is they're saved, and who saves them is Jesse. And before we even talk about the Jesse of it all, I'm kind of thinking back to the episode because it was almost like Ellie was confused where she was at. She was kind of flustered, and it was kind of, it was hard to see who she saw. Obviously, in my mind, I'm like, this is either Tommy or it's either Jesse. But if you look at the scene, it's blurry from her perspective. And I almost felt like the reason it was blurry is because in my eyes, I feel like Ellie, for a second there, thought that was Joel that was saving her. And I think for a second there, Ellie thought that was Joel. But it isn't. It's Jesse. And we obviously, for multiple reasons, it's important that it's him because we just found out and they just found out that Dina's pregnant. And if you think about it from a perspective of Dina was just saved by the father of her child. And if you're Ellie, you're like, oh shoot, this just changes the whole dynamic of our relationship in a sense, because the guy comes in and saves her, the dad comes in and saves them. This is a dynamic that I think is gonna at least give a little bit more compelling nature to this relationship that I feel like has been kind of as we've talked about many times in this breakdown so far, has been kind of handled in a way that's been kind of frustrating. So this new layer, this new dynamic with Jesse coming into the mix, and also I don't want to forget Tommy's here too. And that's really interesting because now this even puts more pressure on Ellie's decision, because now they're in the mix. And if something happens to not only Dina, but if something happens to Jesse or something happens to Tommy, that's going to be on Ellie's hands, because if it wasn't for her going on this mission and dragging Dina along, because you would imagine Jesse and Tommy are there to save them or to bring them back home, as Jesse says in this moment. And he's frustrated at Ellie, rightfully so, because they wouldn't have been in this position if it wasn't for Ellie. So I'm very, very interested to see this dynamic. As I say that out loud, you only got 2 episodes left. And based on the trailer at the end of this episode, it looks like next week might not be all a flashback, but it seems like it's going to be pretty much flashback heavy with Ellie and Joel and maybe Eugene. Maybe we find out a little bit about what happened to Eugene in this episode, but I think next week is going to be a flashback heavy episode, and we might not see a lot of that dynamic that I was hoping for with the four of the characters being in the mix now, being in Seattle. But we'll see. Maybe episode 6 will be split between that narrative and the flashbacks, and then episode 7 will be obviously the ramifications of that. But Jesse saves Ellie and Dina. They make it out. They go run into the middle of the woods, and we hear the wolves saying they're not going to go there, and there has to be a reason why. As we find out, going back to the gang wars, it's because this is the Scars territory. The Scars have gathered up, strung up, hanging up a wolf's character. He's trying to say, I'll join you guys. I'll tell you whatever you want. I'll tell you where the next Isaac's plan is. They don't care. They're like, they're all about that life, about sacrificing and using the wolves as example. As they say, this is essentially, we saw those dead bodies, those strung up, mutilated bodies last week, and we see this ritual that they released them. They're essentially, again, this, I want to learn more about the Scars in a sick, twisted way. In their mind, they think that they're freeing these people, the wolves, of their deprived lives, their sinful lives, or whatever the philosophy is. And their ritual is gutting you from the stomach down and having your guts spill out. And essentially you're being freed into whatever the belief is of this leader that they have, the prophet. So it's, again, Isaac, wolves, Seraphites, Scars, all that stuff is exterior B plot, C plot, world building. That stuff is really working for me. But it goes back to the core of the show. That's the part that has been kind of hit or miss, and more so miss than it has been hit. But as we kind of pivot to the back half of this episode, as they're running out of the they're seeing what just happened to the wolves character. Dina gets shot in the leg by an arrow. Tommy's still out there, hopefully safe and sound. But they're going to meet back at the theater. But as they're split up, we see Ellie sees the hospital. Again, we know the goal was to find the hospital, to find Nora, to find Abby. But in this moment, I don't feel like her deciding to go to the hospital and not, by the way, checking on, she doesn't know if Dina and Tommy and Jesse are safe. The Ellie that we've been dealing with the last 2 episodes, she would have went with them, checked on them, went back to the theater because the love of her life, the her essential uncle of her life is their lives are up for grabs. That Ellie would have went there. But now the show wants me to believe that Ellie is so angry and so vengeful that she's going to just ignore the well-being of her family and her friends and her loved ones and just continue the mission. She's going to push on because she's been building up to that point, right? That hasn't happened, y'all. That hasn't happened. And that's where the frustration comes in. If we would have spent less time with the googly goggly, I love you, I'm going to be a dad, all that nonsense, and just had the frustration and Ellie being so mad. Like we could even last week when they were attacked by that horde, if Ellie would have been like the way she's killing the infected and she's like almost having fun and she's like letting out her anger in that moment, she was scared. She was petrified. Understandably so, but if in that moment we would have seen a level of anger from her building on to that point of her just there's something stewing inside of her that's not right. She's not right. Right. She's, as someone mentioned, with Paul mentioned with the super chat earlier, she's unhinged. If we would have saw that version of Ellie up to that point, her going to the hospital would have made more sense to me. Like, oh, she's not thinking right. She's not thinking about her friends and her loved ones. She wants her revenge. In the midst of all this scars and people being disemboweled and all this stuff going on, she wants to get Nora. If we would have built to that, it would have made sense. But to me, her making that decision of just like dropping the well-being of her friends, it didn't click for me. Anyway, she goes to the hotel. She goes to the hospital. We see Nora caring for wounded people. It's like you gotta, I guess, ignore how she was able to. She crawled her way. She went past the dog and made her way to the top of the floor. Made it to wherever the section of the hospital they were at, assuming it's not heavily guarded. Whatever. She knows how to. She magically found Nora. Again, this is just nitpicks. Anyway, the same way that Jesse was able to find them out of all the places he was able to find them. Anywho, she finds Nora. And if you were watching the watch party, I said to myself, please make me believe that, because I knew Ellie was going to be on her, I'm a killer, take me seriously type stuff. Please make me believe that I can believe that this Ellie can handle the situation and be in a position that I would be intimidated by her if I was in Nora's position. As the scene happens, Nora is coming off in a way that she's slightly scared because someone is obviously pointing a gun at her, but she's also kind of like, nah, I'm not. I don't think you got it in you. Reason I say that is because she antagonizes her. She says that no one should have to see what you saw. The way we did that, it's not right. But the way that little bitch died, like,
Yeah, the little bitch got what he deserved.
you wouldn't say that if a gun was pointed at you. If you were scared for your life, you those are not words you would be saying to someone. So Nora didn't believe her, which makes me not believe her as far as Ellie being intimidating and being fearful of that scene. But I do want to point out, because I almost forgot about this, like Nora, the reason she not wants to get revenge on Nora more than Abby, but the reason why Nora is so important to Ellie is because I almost forgot in episode 2, Nora was the one that was holding Ellie down and made her watch what happened to Joel. So there is like a level of like Abby's number one, public enemy number one, but Nora's right below that. There is and it makes more sense why Abby does what Ellie does to her a little bit later, because again, she was the one that held her down. But again, Ellie being not I don't want to say smartest, but not being in the position of knowing her surroundings, she gets tricked into, she throws the water and she runs towards the elevator, jumps down the elevator, and we realize that This is B1, B2, B3. Going back to the beginning of the episode, she's going to the basement, which we know was infected by the spores. So we see that she gets down there. We have the spores. And I will say, going back to a positive, it's honestly always been a positive about this show. In the mutation of the spores and seeing the look and the design of the stuff was excellent. Very reminiscent of the game. Very tangible. It felt real. It didn't feel like, it was CGI nonsense. It looked very realistic. And I appreciate that. And we see the son of the person we met at the beginning of the episode. We see that he's there too. So, again, shout out to the production, the look, the feel. It was very unsettling and very well produced and really well put together. So as we get down to our final moments of the episode, Nora, coughing, sick. She's infected. She's talking to Ellie.
We're infected. You killed us both.
And tells her, "You idiot. You killed us both. We're contaminated. We're gonna die." And Ellie's like, "You don't see me coughing. I'm fine." And she puts two and two together. She realizes, "Oh, you're the immune girl." I talked about feeling the intimidation or the lack of intimidation from Ellie in the room with Nora when she's held the gun to her. I'm going to give credit where credit is due. There's a level of uneasiness. There's a level of intimidation with Ellie in this scene, because that kiddish vibe that we've been getting from her so far and that lack of aggression that we haven't been getting from her is in this scene. And also too, I love it, going back to the practical, I love it, just like the red background, like all of this stuff is like they're cooking. Yeah, this is a show that I've come to love of up until this point. It's just like there's a level of remembering that the allegory of when you're in this apocalyptic world is not the clickers, the stalkers, the bloaters that you should be afraid of. It's the humans, because it's like you're dehumanized at this point. You're losing that sense of humanity. You lose that sense of community and yourself, right? Because you're just fueled with so much fear. And in this point in the story, anger and revenge. And again, there's a disconnect between the Ellie we saw at the beginning of this episode and Ellie we see here. I don't feel like the lead up is earned, but at least we're here. The journey was rough, but we're here. Ellie is almost, dare I say, Joel-like in this moment. She looks at her and tells her, "Where's Abby?" Forget all the things the stuff you're saying about Joel, the stuff you're saying. I don't want to hear that. Like I felt, and this proves to me that it's not a Bella thing. Bella can act. It's been a writing thing for me. But putting that aside, they redeemed themselves a little bit, because it made me feel like this is the Ellie that I feel like, again, not having played part 2, but having, seen some cut scenes, remembering what people talked about, like Ellie gets kind of dark and gets very bloodthirsty and does things that are like very un-Ellie-like and very almost Joel-like. And she allows the hate and the anger to consume her. And again, going back on in the story, hopefully we're going to see a much darker version of Ellie. She puts her gun away, gets a pipe, and almost like Abby in a way, when she got the golf club, she got the pipe. She's beating her with this pipe to get the answers of where Abby is. Ladies and gentlemen, again, the road to get to this point was very bumpy, very frustrating, very lackluster. But sometimes it's not about the way you got to the, I can't remember the quote. It's not about the destination. You guys know what I'm saying. It's not about how we got there. It's that we got there. It wasn't pretty, but we got there. That man being Joel. So again, rough journey to get there. I have my reasons why. As I talked about earlier, I think the show was protecting Bella. I feel like this is a new chapter. This is a new version of Ellie. And I'm really intrigued to see what this new version looks like. I'm also very intrigued to see Tommy's here. Jesse's here. Dina's here. Jesse doesn't know he's a dad. And Jesse doesn't know that Ellie and Dina are in love and they're together. So that's really interesting. From what I understand in the game, Tommy, at this point in the game, has taken out almost all of Seattle. So I'm very intrigued to see if we see that version of Tommy, that John Wick version of Tommy. Going back to Jesse, I really like the character, but I feel like in order to spark something in Tommy, in order to spark maybe a confrontation between Dina and Ellie, unfortunately, I think someone's going to have to die. And unfortunately, I think that person's going to be Jesse. We'll see. Before we wrap up this breakdown and continue the live discussion based on next week's trailer, it looks like it's going to be mostly flashbacks. And from what I understand from the game, this is a pretty emotional moment between Joel and Ellie. And also they mixed in the conversation between Joel and Ellie when he told her that he lied. So that seems to be the main focus, but I'm curious if it's going to be half flashbacks, half present storyline, or if it's just going to be, because we know we got the flashback. Well, not a flash. Well, yeah, it was a flashback, that kind of bottle episode. But yeah, I'm really curious to know if we're going to get just an all flashback, or if it's going to be flashback, what's going on, with where they're at, with obviously Nora being beaten by a pipe. And I'm also curious on where the hell is Abby? Where is she? She's on vacation. But that's going to be the end of this breakdown. Again, this is a clip out from a much longer live discussion. We have a live discussion every single Sunday. We do a watch party first, then the after show, which you're seeing now, but it's an edited version of this. So if you are watching this on YouTube, if you are listening to this on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, or watching on Spotify, because you can also do a video on Spotify, do me a favor. Leave your thoughts on this episode in the comments below. Let me know what you like, what you didn't like, what you love, what you are happy about in the comments. Share your thoughts, your theories, your concerns in the comments. And of course, like, share, and consider subscribing. And also follow me on my podcast on Apple and Spotify. Hope to see you all on the live next week. Catch you on the next video.